Now, one of the best things about RuneScape is there's just so many ways to play the game. You can play the game efficiently, inefficiently, you can play a restricted account, you can never read a guide in your life and play the game. That's the beauty of it. That said, there are some things I think most people should be doing in RuneScape, and regardless of the way you like to play, I think this will benefit you. Now, one piece of content I think is overlooked, and I think a lot of people could benefit from using, are a pretty new item, Moonlight Moths. Now, Moonlight Moths are a way to restore your prayer, and they're actually incredibly strong and cost effective, especially for people who have a low prayer level. Now, unlike the prayer potion, which has 4 doses, the Moonlight Moth can have 2 per inventory slot, which is significantly less. So if you're doing a piece of content that requires tight inventory spaces, you'll probably not want to bring these, but for most everyday uses like Slayer, a decent amount of different bosses, and questing, these are a great option. Now, how does the Moonlight Moth 2 compare to the prayer potion? Well, a Moonlight Moth will give you 2 uses at 22 prayer points each. And notably, this doesn't scale with your prayer level. So even if you're level 1 prayer, this will give you 22, well, I guess so. Okay, even if you're level like 43 prayer, this will give you 22 prayer points back, which is actually incredible for low level accounts. Now this equates to about 45 GP per prayer point. Now if you compare that to the prayer potion, it starts off at 3 times more expensive at nearly 150 GP per PP. Yes, I know one of you out there just laughed right now. And will get more cost effective on your way to 99, but still will max out at only 80 GP per prayer point. So still twice as expensive. So I think pretty much everyone should be using these at a low prayer level and might even consider using them further just to save money over time. Now, a really new feature that I think is incredibly useful is the energy threshold to re-enable running setting. Now, if you ever run around Gillinor and you try to hit a stamina potion when you're like 0 run energy, you'll start walking for a while. Now, what this will do is as soon as your run energy is above the threshold you set, it'll turn your run back on automatically. So if you set this to 1, as soon as you have any energy, you will start running again, which means you never have to worry about being a walker ever again. Now, there are some settings where you might want to turn this off, in which case you can just turn it back to 0 to disable the feature, but it's actually a massive quality of life update that has a whole host of uses. Now, another thing I think people should be doing way more often is using offensive prayers when they're training Slayer, or other non-bossing encounters even as well. Prayers like Piety or Rigor are so strong and will make a much bigger difference than any gear you might be lacking in. It's usually better to bring prayer boosting gear, such as Proselyte or Sunfire, and camping Piety than it would be to bring Bandos or even Torva and not use Piety. You can get a very high prayer bonus nowadays as well by taking advantage of all the prayer boosting gear, and this will actually really keep down the price of prayer potions even when you're using these really draining prayers. For example, we have this fictional Slayer task here where we have someone who's bringing pretty much max melee beyond the really expensive pieces, but not using Piety, in comparison to using full Sunfire and a Dragon Bone necklace, Arania boots, much less strength bonus, but Piety more than makes up the difference, and will give you such a high prayer bonus that the cost isn't even that bad. So definitely camp Piety while slaying, it's worth it. Now, something that most people aren't planning for when they play old school RuneScape is dying. It can happen to anyone, and dying can be a very expensive affair. Oh my god, it sounds like I'm selling life insurance, but what I'm actually talking about is stocking your death coffer. Now, ever since the new death system was added in a few years ago, death fees can add up to 500k per death, assuming you're in a PVM scenario. Now, once in a while, that's not the end of the world, but if you're trying to do very high-end or difficult content, dying is inevitable and can eat up a lot of funds, especially while you're trying to learn. Things like raids, the Colosseum, Zulrah, Vorkath, PVM encounters can have a pretty steep learning curve, and if you have to pay exorbitant death fees on top of your supply cost, it can be a bit demotivating. So how do you get around this? Well, there is one thing you can do, and that is stocking death coffers with favorable items to trade in. Now, these can be a little tricky to find, and good options aren't always available, but especially when a new update comes out and prices become very volatile, you can find really good deals. Now, the way Death's Coffer works is it takes the GE value, or the recent GE value, and will give you roughly that amount added to your Death's Coffer if you sacrifice it. But as prices fluctuate so much, If an item drops in value really quickly, death is a bit slow and won't have always the exact up-to-date price, which means often you can find items that are worth twice as much in death's coffer as you could buy them from the Grand Exchange for. So when you see an opportunity like that, definitely I would recommend taking it, because that is literally just a half off discount to your deaths. And trust me, it's worth it. I've probably paid 50 to 100 mil just in death fees learning the Colosseum. But even for smaller deaths, just having money in there is nice and will save you money in the long run. Now, one assumption I made for a long time is that the Fang is not good when you're training Slayer. Pretty much whenever I'd go to do a Slayer task, I would default to just withdrawing an Abyssal Whip or a Blowpipe, but it turns out the Osmunten's Fang is actually really competitive at a large variety of Slayer creatures. Pretty much anything that has a moderate amount of defense, the Fang actually outclasses the Whip in many scenarios. And with the Fang being close to 10 mil, this item is better than ever, even for training Slayer. Okay, so just for an example, assuming you're in Bandos level gear, somewhere around there, the Fang is better than the Whip at Abyssal Demons, assuming you're meleeing them, Metallic Dragons, Black Demons, Suquas, Aberrant Spectres, Skeletal Wyverns, as well as Gargoyles and Trolls. Basically, just look at the Slayer list, and pretty much anything above level 70, assuming you would normally melee it, the Fang normally outperforms the Whip and even the Blowpipe. And even on tasks where it's not technically better, it's still pretty competitive and isn't trolling by any means. So if you have a Fang, using it for Slayer is actually a good idea in quite a few circumstances. Now, with the addition of Varlamore comes one item that I think is incredibly underrated and has so many uses across the early and mid game for ranged, and that would be using the Hunter's Sunlight Crossbow. This thing is actually so good and ridiculously cheap. The Hunter's Sunlight Crossbow is an amazing weapon just for training ranged on weaker monsters like sand crabs, ammonite crabs, and will almost always outperform the rune crossbow and the magic shortbow by a significant margin, and is even competitive with other higher level range weapons as well. Now, there are a couple of things that make this weapon so good. One pretty simple one is it actually has a higher attack range than the rune crossbow, which adds more flexibility to where you can attack from, which actually makes it a great weapon for early fight caves even. Now, another thing that makes this crossbow very unique is its attack speed. It attacks at a 3-tick attack speed, which is quite a bit faster than any other crossbow in the game, which means it kind of feels like an early game blowpipe more so than an actual crossbow. And it fires a unique set of ammunition as well, the Moonlight and Sunlight Antler Bolts, which aren't actually that expensive right now. Now, this weapon even scales pretty well into the late game, even being best in slot at a few random pieces of content. For example, higher level Slayer creatures, it actually is best in slot for ranged at Basilisk Knights. But in my opinion, it really excels in the mid game, and I would highly recommend picking this weapon up because it only costs 5,000 GP. It's dirt cheap, so there's no cost investment at all, so I would definitely recommend using this and giving it a try. Now, in my opinion, another thing you should be doing is using Divine Potions almost all the time. Yes, there is an increased cost, and I fought using these for a long time. And no, you don't need to use them all the time. Like if you're killing a lower level monster, doing some AFK training, sure, you don't really need to use these, but as soon as you're fighting something that is moderately profitable like a boss, Divine Potions are a must in my opinion. This really became obvious when I started using the Bow of Ferdinan, because once you get 99 ranged, that is a very specific number, and you need exactly 99 ranged to hit your maximum of 46 damage. If you lose even one range level, it drops it to 44, which is a really significant DPS decrease just for having your potion roll over by 1. So that is where Divine Potions are so powerful. It'll keep your stats boosted up to its maximum boost for the entire 5-minute period, which means in the case of me using a Bofa, increases my DPS by 0.4 just for using a Divine Potion. That's the equivalent of buying tens of millions of GP worth of gear at this point, just in one potion. So unless you really need to save the money, using the divine variants of potions is almost always worth it because it increases your damage, which will more than pay for the extra cost, and will even increase your experience per hour as well, so across the board, worth using. Now, another thing that I think players should be doing, and is another somewhat new addition, is killing sulfur naguas. Don't kill sand crabs anymore. Sand crabs are kind of old news except for players who really want to AFK to the maximum potential. But at this point, the amount of experience you're sacrificing by killing crabs instead is starting to become pretty massive that I don't think it's worth it anymore. Sulfur Naguas are unlocked by completing the Moons of Peril and getting access to an Apotzl, and it seems like they specifically designed this area just to be an insanely good training method. Sulfur Naguas have a very specific mechanic called flat armor, and they have -5 flat armor, which means essentially every time you hit, it'll add 5 to your hit splat. This means weapons that attack twice are incredibly strong here, such as the Sulfur Blades or the Dual Makohetl. Now this method becomes even better because you get access to free prayer potions and free super attack and strength potions essentially, because all of the supplies for killing the Moons of Peril are offered in the dungeon, and you can take advantage of these to just train your account, which means there will be no supply cost to doing this as well. Now the best weapon for this is the Dual Makohetl with full Blood Moon armor, which means you can take advantage of the set effect, which makes it even stronger. At just 70 attack, strength, and defense, you can get ridiculous XP per hour of well over 100k, and this can scale up to over 150k per hour as you get closer to 99. While costing nothing in supplies, the only real downside right now is the weapon and armor are really expensive due to the new Huicatl boss, but that'll probably go down over time. And even without it, killing these is still significantly better than sand crabs, or really any other monster in the game at this level. And you get some rune crafting experience as well along the way, thanks to the sulfurous essence drop, so it kind of has a bit of everything. So those are 8 things I think you should take advantage of in Old School RuneScape. A lot of them are pretty new as well, and it'll increase your damage, your experience, or it'll just make your RuneScape journey easier. Thanks for watching guys as always, I hope you found the video useful, and I'll see you next time.